So today we're going to be talking a little bit about habitat management for deer and upland birds. Primarily, we're going to discuss how we can manage the land in general that's going to benefit deer, and a little bit that's going to help with upland birds. For me, when I go out and I talk to the landowner, I always like to say, you know, the first things first, what are your goals and objectives? What do you want to accomplish with your land? You know, you pay a lot of money to purchase this property, you pay a lot in taxes every year. So you want to get what you put into it, right? You know, so in this case, I say, what are you looking for out of your property? Do you want to improve your habitat, increase diversity? Is it a big buck like the one on the screen there? Throw that off to the side. You looking for a big buck, lots of plant diversity. Maybe you have pollinators on the mind. You like to take the kids out, go drive around with ATV, improve food availability. Maybe you want to promote more bedding on site so your deer are not going over to your neighbors and getting shot over there. So you just want bigger bucks and more birds. We can work with that. So this presentation is going to outline how we can kind of promote all of that, if it will. You know what? I think we're probably going to have to run this off someone else's computer, Katie. I will, if you can open it up in the share, or I will send you that email. Again, I am sorry about this. I don't know why my computer is giving me a hard time.
Ethan, can you upload it on yours?
Yeah, hold on, I got it. 1 second.
Must love technology.
Right.
Okay, can you guys see it?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you for doing that, Ethan. Again, everyone, I apologize. I'm just having some computer issues. Everything was running fine earlier, now not so much. So, and it's also kind of thrown the PowerPoint out of whack too. So, as we get back into this, we'll talk about the property layout. You know, we'll do a site visit. If you get a hold of a biologist who can come out and talk to you and help you with some plant identification, or maybe give you some good tips or pointers, put some eyes on it, get to know what's out there. You want to know exactly what you have on the landscape. Do you have food plots? Do you have areas that you know deer are bedding? What about native warm season grass where you have pheasants hanging out? Maybe you've got an area that's really bad invasive species. So you should get out there and kind of take a look and identify what's there. How many acres? You know, maybe you want to have a spot that's laid out exactly right for getting that big buck off the bedding area. Well, this is a really good opportunity as you go through these progressions to figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work, and where. And even helps you kind of get an idea of how much work is also there too. If you're doing invasive species removal, there can be a ton out there that you wouldn't have realized beforehand that you had. It could be a lot of work. You can go ahead and click through a couple times there, Ethan. You know, we got food plots identified. Maybe you got bedding areas, spots you want to plant some trees. Maybe that's a really good bedding ridge. Maybe you have a section of your property that you just want to transition and get something more out of it. Old pasture that's grown up. Maybe you want to get a food plot in there, or you want to get some native cover. You know, just check it out, walk around, form some ideas. Next slide. Again, going back into the idea of planning everything, Write it all down. What are your goals? What are your objectives? What do you want out of this property? Write it down. Generally, we like to have a layout of 80% cover, 20% food. So you want to have a little bit more food plots in about 20% range, and then cover and native vegetation in the 80%. You know, find those locations where you want to have your food plots, what you want to put in those food plots, what areas are your bedding areas, which areas are water sources, transition areas, and then food availability from your non-food plot areas. And that kind of includes native vegetation and how that can play a role in the health of your deer. Then I'll say everyone, you know, you should make a map, get some satellite imagery, lay out how many acres of where and what you want to do in that place. And if you have any questions about this, again, consult a biologist, get a professional out there, someone you could talk to, and they can give you some ideas and help you out with that. Next slide. So here's an example. This is a property that I recently purchased in northern New York. That's where I'm from. It's part of the old family farm. I've got a little bit of it laid out, and I've got some spots where I want to put pollinators, some areas with native warm season grass. I want to put in a shallow wetland. These are just all ideas and things. And it's actually a lot of fun to do this planning. At least from my perspective, I have a lot of fun with it. But I also have a lot of open space that's hayfield, and I want to transition that into better native cover. And that's where breaking it all down, writing it down, and creating a plan is the first step in getting that to happen. Next slide. Now, before we get into it, again, I want to apologize. My computer is having some trouble and it messed up the PowerPoint a little bit, and sorry about that. But when I first start working on the property and I'm going to go out there and make a change to the vegetation or some kind of soil disturbance, first things first, remove the invasive species. Invasive species are number one. You know, if you do anything and you don't have the invasive species taken care of, they're going to go crazy, and it's just going to create a lot more work for you, and it's going to set back the natural vegetation that you're hoping to promote. And a lot of ways that you can kind of set back this invasive species is by doing things like cut stump treatments, mulching, foliar applications. Cut stumps are really great options. I generally recommend that you also use chemical or herbicide with those, otherwise they will sprout back. And invasive species removal is going to be a multi-year project. And once you have those invasive species under control and eliminated, then you can start focusing on the native plant community. Whether you're going to go in and plant shrubs, plant a food plot, plant native warm season grasses, or run a prescribed fire through there and try to get natural vegetation to come through. Next slide. Here's a really good example. This is a piece of timber that is just overtaken by honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is the lighter color wood that you're seeing in there. It's just really thick, and it's not a lot of area that is taken over, but it would take me a while to go through there and try to cut all that out. But that's going to be one of the first things I do when I want to make a change to that landscape, because I want to get my invasive species taken care of. Next slide. Now, identification is really key with invasives because there's a lot of plants that look similar. For example, here on this slide, I've got coralberry, which is a native shrub on top, and below I've got honeysuckle. They look pretty similar when you're walking around in the woods, even when they have their leaves on. So it's important that you really get a good handle on identification before you go out there and start cutting and spraying. And I'm going to now turn it over to Ethan. He's going to talk a little bit more about the importance of forest management.
Hello. Thank you for that, Jared. So whenever you're planning for deer management, forest management is is very important and can be a pretty useful tool, especially if you have a lot of timber on your property. You'll be able to promote diversity and wildlife benefit by managing your forest. Whenever you are managing your forest, though, you're looking for at least 20% sunlight to hit the forest floor, but 30 to 50% is ideal. It depends kind of what location of the country you're in and what species you have as to why that varies. Whenever you do start performing your forest management, you are going to see an increased food source in the forbs and more cover for deer because you'll have more shrubs and lower to the floor species, which will provide them some good cover. So for forest management, you're going to want to promote your hard mass species. So those are basically your nut producing trees. So oaks, hickories, walnuts, those are your pretty common ones around Illinois. There might be a few others, but those are the most common. So as some of the pictures you saw from Jared and this one here, most of your unmanaged forest are going to be overgrown with invasives and unwanted trees, or low timber value trees, as some people would refer to them as. The common invasives you will see will be autumn olive, honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and then you're going to see a lot of your softer wood trees like American basswood and hackberry. They will start to take over if you don't control them, and maples and black cherries, especially up around where I am in central Illinois, take over a lot of your oak forest if you don't help manage it. And there are many different ways you can manage your forest. The first thing, as Jared kind of just hit on, is invasive species removal. Doing an invasive species removal and not removing any trees will still help your forest out, as that will allow some sunlight to hit the ground, and you'll start seeing forbs pop up that way. Some people will also do a forest stand improvement or crop tree release as they're doing their invasive species removal. That is kind of, they come hand in hand. They both are on the ground doing mechanical removal of stuff. You can spray smaller trees, but they're a little bit harder to kill with chemical. And then prescribed burning is the last important thing for forest management once you have started doing some management and getting in there and removing some stuff. So as I said, besides invasive removal, forest stand improvement, or TSI, some people call it, depends who you talk to, or a crop tree release is probably the most important thing you can do to your timber to give it a little bit more diversity and more beneficial to wildlife and especially deer. Some people get forest stand improvement and crop tree release confused. Crop tree release is kind of would be a type of forest stand improvement. It's more focusing on your trees you're wanting to keep. So your oaks and hickories. What you would do for a crop tree release, you would go find a specific tree you're wanting to save and remove all the trees around it. Most people say you want to give it about a 50-foot buffer from the edge of its canopy to where the next tree would be. And by doing this, you will give it more sunlight to allow it to produce more fruit. It will be able to expand its growth, and it also will give sunlight on the floor right there to allow some of your native forbs to grow. And if it's an oak tree, they do like acorns, and their saplings need a lot of sunlight to grow, so you'll be able to help it in future growth for your forest. Target trees, like I said, that compete with canopy height are really going to be your maples. They're probably the #1 competitor to an oak tree around here. They grow very fast, and they can suffocate out your oak trees. And then also, whenever you're doing this, your management, you kind of want to, if you're doing a forest stand improvement, you want to pick some younger trees to leave, whether they're maples, black cherries are good too, because deer will actually browse on those younger trees. So that provides a good food source for them in the spring and summer and towards the fall. And if they don't browse your tree down, you can eventually, if it starts to compete with an oak, you can go back and remove it. And as I kind of said earlier, the deer are going to use those acorns from your oak trees, especially white and red oaks. They're around here, they're pretty big producers for oak trees that deer prefer, and that gives them a good fall and winter food source that they use pretty heavily, and almost they use those usually when your food plots go out. And then here are two pictures. Both of these are, the one on the left is after a forest stand or timber stand improvement went through, and you can see some trees laying on the ground that they thinned. And you can see there's a lot of forbs starting to grow up. Some of those, I see a few resprouts of trees, but that provides a good browse and cover for deer during during your summer months. And on the right, this was a thinning project that they did. And as you can see, there's goldenrod almost everywhere, all throughout the picture. And that's also going to provide a good food source. And it will provide cover all year round, most of the time, as it doesn't usually fall over in the snow, wind, and ice. So that goldenrod can be a good all year cover. And then, as I also mentioned, prescribed fire is a very useful tool for managing your forest. It's going to promote the growth for your oaks and hickories, as they are fire resistant and will help set back maples and invasives, cherries, and some of your other unwanted trees that can take over your forest if you don't keep managing it. Now, prescribed fire usually is more beneficial after you've done some sort of management on your property, but you can always start out with a prescribed fire too. It just may not be as beneficial as one that would be performed after you've gone through and maybe removed some trees or some invasives. And another thing you will want to do with your prescribed fire, if you have the time and resources, to divide your timber up into sections. If you have a larger block of timber, this will be beneficial because you can give a variety of habitat. If you burn one unit a year, or a unit every other year, it will give a diverse habitat in each section of your timber, because one will have that will be freshly burned, not much is going on there, but one that maybe hasn't been burned for 5 years will have some tree sprouts growing up, some forbs growing in it pretty well, and will give the deer a good cover area. Whereas one that is freshly burned, if you burn it in the fall or in the spring later that year, when the acorns fall, it'll be easier for the deer to find them. And clover fire breaks are a great option if you are going to separate your timber into units. Clover fire breaks, one, provide a food source for deer, and they're very easy to maintain. You could let them grow all year, or maybe mow them once or twice, but clover fire breaks are a very valuable resource whenever it comes to prescribed fire. And then here are two pictures. The one on the left is a active burn. This was a fairly late season burn. The honeysuckle actually already was all leafed out, so it did get a good kill for the honeysuckle resprouts that were there, but it also killed quite a few unwanted tree saplings that was on the property after they went through and TSI'd it. And on the right is a after picture of a property that has been managed for TSI and has been burned. And as you can see, there's quite a few of forbs growing up. There's some vines in there that were producing fruit and tree saplings. So it provides a little bit of cover and forage for deer in the summer. And then kind of the outcome of forest management, once you have a plan and start implementing it, you will see the rewards from your work. You know, doing, even if it's going through and cutting invasives, you'll go ahead and start to see some forbs starting to pop up because they will be getting some sunlight. You might see some oak saplings start, depending on how much your canopy cover is. And then, as I've kind of already hit on, properly managed forest, they can provide food sources throughout the year. The spring and summer, those are going to be kind of your browsing food sources, your saplings and forbs, berries from blackberry vines that will grow. They usually do well just about anywhere. And then the fall and winter, those will be more of your nut food sources in your acorns. And then diverse habitat will also create better cover for deer. They can hide in the cover that's there, but it'll also provide them food that will be close proximity to where they maybe are bedding, if you are doing a bedding project or just doing your normal TSI. And then another aspect that's a pretty good management for just about every species of game in Illinois would be edge feathering. And what happened here? I do not know what happened there. Okay, so we're back. So edge feathering is very beneficial to wildlife, and that edge feathering is creating a gradual transition, basically from the edge of your timber to a food plot, CRP field, or even if it's an ag field. It will provide a screen cover and can also be a food source depending on how you kind of go about it. And as I said, it will create spaces not only for deer but for other small game species. Quail and rabbit really love the edges of timber and fields. They use those quite often. Turkeys, they'll even nest on the edge of timbers, and if it's properly managed. So there's a few ways to create an edge. One way that is a little bit more valuable, it'll have a little bit of food source, would be planting native shrubs along the edge of your timber. So if you have a food plot or just a ag field, or if it's CRP, planting shrubs that are about 15 foot to 30 foot in width along your edge of your timber are going to provide an escape cover, and it'll be a nice transition for the wildlife whenever they come out of the timber to the food plot. Deer will like it because they can kind of be hidden, but they can see what's out in the field before they enter it. Another way is hinge cutting the edge of your timber. which hinge cutting is cutting partway through a tree so it will fall while still staying intact. This is kind of a little bit of a difficult task in some places, as some trees aren't necessarily capable of being hinge cut, depending on if they lean the wrong way or what type of tree it is, but it will work. If you are able to do it, it will work very well. Now, hinge cutting should be done late winter or to early spring, or you can also do it late in the summer. And then, Jared, I will go back to you for this one.
All right, thank you, Ethan. That was some great information. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about upland areas, mix in a little bit how we can help out our upland birds while still reaching our goals for deer and turkey, primarily deer. So when I have these upland areas or a lot of space, it's in an open area and I don't know what to do with it, I might be considering, well, how do I want to utilize this space and be efficient with this land that I own? I don't just want cool season grasses everywhere or, you know, wide open space, or maybe there's a section of an ag field that doesn't do so well for the producer or the farmer, and you want to transition that into cover or native habitat. So you can promote native grass and forb mixes on the landscape, or you can do shrub row plantings. Both are really great options. For native grass and forb plantings, it creates great bedding cover for fawns. It maximizes summer or growing season nutrition for deer, and I'll hit on that in a little bit here. It can improve soil health, help with a lot of erosion issues that you might have, and it's going to provide fantastic cover, both escape cover and nesting cover for your upland birds. Just got a couple of photos here I want people to see. Top photo, there's a pheasant in there if you can see it. He just popped out of the native warm season grass stand. I've got a New England aster, which is a native forb in the top left. And that plant actually has a tremendous amount of crude protein, which I'll hit on here in a second with white-tailed deer and their requirements for their antler growth and body composition. And then below, you can see I've got some shrubs. Those are native shrubs. Now, they do look a lot similar to your invasive species, so getting your identification down pat is crucial before you go out there and start cutting and spraying and burning. But that's just one row with a couple volunteer trees growing in there, and that provides really great structure, really great screening cover as well. I know a lot of guys want to plant grasses or annuals that can create screening really quickly, and that's fine, but you got to plant that year after year, or it's a really expensive seed. For me, I'm going to plant some shrubs. I'm going to wait a few years. I'm going to take care of them, and they're going to grow up and provide far more than just a monoculture of grass strip going through there. All right. I got a couple photos. Ethan could pop those up for you. All right, so here's a whitetail fawn that I found in the timber. There's no vegetation around. It's just leaves and sticks, and that thing is out in the open and easy to see. Unfortunately, predators can see that really easily too. So kind of going back a little bit to what Ethan was saying earlier, you get more sunlight in there, you might run a prescribed fire through there and kind of reduce that plant matter that's on the ground, that dead, dried debris, and you can get a response from the seed bank. And you can promote a lot more native cover, and you can hide that fawn. And I know you want to put a lot of time into trapping or removing coyotes, and that works all right too. But I'm going to do the best of both worlds, and I'm going to provide some really great cover for them too. And these native warm season grass and forb mixes or pollinator mixes, they do a fantastic job. I got another photo for you here to take a look at. That is a buck bed. And in the background, yes, that is a bunch of switchgrass, cave and rock switchgrass that's 7 to 8 foot tall. Now, this is an area that was a restoration site, and the switchgrass went wild, and it's very thick of switchgrass. But there are pockets where there is no switchgrass, and that's where I find all the deer. I got the buck who beds right there in that little pocket up against that cottonwood tree, and he sits right there. And there's a couple small ponds too around the area that he goes to, gets some water, comes back, browses on some of these native plants that are growing around, but he's got all the security cover he needs. And it, you know, Ethan, you can click on that there and it's going to show you the bed. And that was a pretty nice buck when I jumped him out of that bed. I also do want to give another thing about, I'm not hating on switchgrass. It is great. It has great importance, but I'm just trying to get people to think about a little bit outside the box and not so much a monoculture of switchgrass, which can be difficult for deer to move through, but maybe mix it up, get some natives in there, or create little pockets of diversity somewhere where they can feel safe and they can browse and get some of that great nutrition from these native plants like the New England aster. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about nutritional importance of native plants. So deer are selective browsers, and they're going to browse on woody browse, forbs, grasses, and the masts. Now, Ethan mentioned earlier about acorns and a lot of the other masts in the fall that are important for deer. For example, corn, that's a really big thing in the Midwest and a lot of other places. You know, people always say corn is king. And I say corn is great, but it's all over the place. And then in the fall, when the acorns start dropping, all the deer are in the woods. And you're probably wondering, well, they really like acorns. Well, that's because acorns have twice the amount of carbohydrates of corn and 10 times the amount of fat. And when you're getting ready for the winter, these deer are trying to put on a lot of fat and a lot of energy reserves because it's going to get cold. The food availability is going to be a lot less. They're going to do a lot of running around during the rut as well. So when I'm looking at mid-spring to late summer, that's probably the most crucial time for deer. For does, you're getting into late gestation, right before they're going to drop their fawns, all the way through to lactation. Well, these fawns are relying on the doe for their nutrition. So the doe needs to be in great condition as well. And then for you big buck hunters out there, antler growth. Antler growth is key in the summertime. That's when they're growing that antler. And for them, they need a requirement. It is a requirement for these deer to be able to do these things of 12 to 18% crude protein, where 25 to 30% or 32% is even better. So you're thinking about these native plants that we talked about, all these plantings everywhere, these pollinators, and you say, well, I see the deer in there a lot and they're eating these things. Well, just to give you an idea, that New England aster has over 20% crude protein. Pokeweed, I know some of you might know pokeweed, that's got 32% crude protein. Beggar's lice, which is like that plant you'll see on the edge of a field or in the timber and it sticks to your legs all the time. It's a real pain to get off your clothes. That's 28.2% crude protein. This is stuff that's almost as competitive with your soybeans that you grow out there. But this place, you can put this all over the place. Lots of diversity, lots of different plants. And the big thing about that is that these plants are going to grow from the early spring all the way into the late fall. So you're going to have different plants that are going to be at their peak growth at different times of that season. And with that, you're going to have lots of availability for nutrition. And that also includes the minerals that are important. Phosphorus, calcium, and sodium are all really important for deer during this time of year. And some of your food plots are not going to be able to provide the requirements for minerals, especially trace minerals, which they don't need a ton of, but they do need it. They're really important to have. And a lot of your food plots are not going to be able to meet those requirements. But this native vegetation, whether you're planting a native warm season grass and forb planting, pollinator planting, or you opened up the timber a little bit and got a forb response, that's going to be really important for these deer during that time. And it's arguably the most important time for deer because it's getting their bodies ready for the fall. You know, browse is 40 to 50% of their total diet. And another 30% of their diet are forbs, which are the most important because, as I mentioned, that protein level in the summer when they really need it, and the minerals. So having a nice, diverse native planting, it might just provide fantastic cover for your fawns. It might provide some good bedding cover. You got your upland birds using it. You have pollinators using it. Now your deer are using it. It's almost like having a fantastic food plot. And that's when I'd say, well, can't I just pick and choose different species that I like based off of protein? And I say, yeah, you can make a custom mix if you want, if that's your goal, but make sure you do have a diverse planting. You don't want to have a monoculture out there that's only going to be fantastic for one short period of time. And that's the thing with some food plots. And again, I'm not trying to hate on the food plot guys. Food plots definitely serve their purpose. I'm the kind of person that kind of looks at my food plots in the fall. When I lose all this forb and I have just my woody browse that's available for deer, and all the acorns are gone and it starts to get cold, that's when my food plots kind of kick in and they kind of make up for that lack of food. And you go to my neighbors and they don't have that. They don't have the great summer nutrition. So the deer are with me all summer long. They're comfortable there. I've got great bedding. And then I roll into fall and now I've got all the great food, as those deer, they don't want to go a mile to pick through a small cornfield. I've got it right there for them. So that's kind of how I look about nutrition for these deer and how you can get them on your property and spend more time on your property. That's going to increase your sighting of deer, and you're going to have bigger deer as well. If you want to get the most out of your deer, and that includes antler development, you really got to hit on the crude protein and the important minerals that they need. The bigger, the better. This is a buck. We found this shed in a pollinator planting. Even though those pollinators were not growing, the deer wasn't browsing on those pollinators were still 3 to 4 foot high and provide really good structure late into the fall, all the way in through winter. And you'll have guys say, well, my native grasses, they kind of fold down and they lay over, so I plant this instead. And it's like, okay, that works too, but these native plants are actually going to be able to hold up. These forbs have these heavy stems. They're going to be able to hold up and provide really good cover. And sure enough, that's where this buck was hanging out when he dropped his shed. Now, you might have heard about, I would say it's getting pretty popular, but stump sprouts and the nutrition behind stump sprouts. This is a summertime photo from a property that I recently purchased. This is a red maple. And red maple, as far as browsing on the leaves, does not provide great nutritional benefit in the summertime for deer. Browsing on the buds afterwards through the fall and winter, it is a preferred species in some locations. But what happened here is the area flooded, the tree died, the flood receded, and it sent a bunch of sprouts out from the base of this tree. And if you cut or hinge cut, you'll get a response similar to this. You'll get a lot of sprouting. So the main stem is dead. There's no nutrients being pushed up through. All of it's coming out in that one space. And I like to think of it as that tree is going to push up the same amount of nutrients it would if it had 10,000 leaves, but instead it's got about 500 leaves. So you're going to have more nutrients available in each leaf than you would if you had a full-size tree. And that is actually what's making the deer browse so heavily on these leaves that normally don't have a lot of nutritional value. And it's a hot commodity in there. All my red maples look just like that. Now, it's unfortunate that I lost so many red maples, but you know, the beavers came in and it is what it is. But I still have something great going on here. So if you're going through, you're doing your TSI practices, your crop tree release, and you want to leave a few of these stumps untreated with herbicide and try to get some kind of response like this, you know, that's going to provide a little bit of benefit too. But don't go crazy. You know, again, consult your biologist, talk to them a little bit, get an idea. And again, identify those species and get to know what's out there. So here's a good photo. Nice buck, but there's just not a lot in there for him to eat. You're seeing a lot of leaves. There's some browse from those American beech trees in the back, those small ones that still have their leaves on. But other than that, he's just passing through. You know, where he goes to get to his food is away from where he beds. The bedding security that he likes the best is in a different direction from where his food was, and he has to cut through this open area. Now, he got lucky, got him in the daytime picture, and a buddy of mine was lucky enough to harvest this deer, but he had an idea where this deer was moving. He's got these requirements that he needs. He needs to go get that food. So when you're setting up your property, you can think about, all right, I want to get native plants out here. I want to improve the timber, but I also want to be able to set it up where I can hunt it and have success as well. So, and that comes back to that planning aspect in creating a map. You know, get out there. You might have 100 acres of timber, but you only have time to work on 5 to 10, 15 acres. So you might want to look at how you can set those areas up now to have more success in the fall and winter. So I want to do a little bit of some identification here and talk about a few species real quick. And I think getting a little handheld book with some identification, a little ID book is really helpful. And I say this to all the landowners that I meet. It's important that you get to know what's out there. Some of these invasive species like the coralberry and the honeysuckle, they look the same. Most people see them and they look the same. Even myself, when I'm out there backpack spraying in the summer with a foliar application, I got to slow down because I might accidentally hit one of those coral berries because it just looks so close. A lot of your native brambles, blackberry, raspberry, they look like multiflora rose when they don't have any leaves on them. And if you're going in the wintertime and you're trying to do a cut stump treatment, you might end up cutting off the wrong thing. So here I've got some really great species. Smooth sumac. For those on the East Coast area, staghorn sumac, they look pretty similar. That's a great plant for them that has strong nutrient availability. They'll eat the fruiting body or the seed head. You'll see that little red seed head. And it grows fairly quickly, so it can provide some quick structure for you as well. And bucks love to rub on them. Rough leaf dogwood is just one of the many dogwood options that we have throughout the country. That provides great cover for wildlife, great browse availability for deer, high nutrition, and it does great for birds as well. They'll go and eat those berries, and it helps them with their migration through the fall. So yeah, our focus is deer or upland birds, but I can also do these things to help other animals out as well. That's ultimately what I'm looking for, is to improve the habitat, do it for the deer, do it for everything else, and have a great response. As I mentioned before, pokeweed. Some people see it as a pain or a really bad weed. Humans, it's toxic to eat the berries, so don't eat the berries. But the birds love the berries and they have a ton of nutrition. And when the deer browse on this in the summer, you know, you're talking 32% crude protein. And that is really great for deer. On the other side, jewelweed. Some people say touch me not. They've got that little seed pod where if you touch it a little bit, it'll kind of blow up and almost shatter and throw the seed. That's another great browse. So if you're in a wetland setting and you get to see a little bit more of the jewelweed, you know, that's great browse. Don't go in there and tear it out or rip it up or drive over it with your ATV. Keep a lookout for these plants when you go through this process. Open up the canopy, run a fire through there, and you're going to get a great response from the natives who are just sitting in the seed bank waiting for their chance. But before you do any of that, make sure you have your invasive species under control. You hear it all the time, ragweed. All right, well, some people have issues with their allergies. This is a really common weed you see growing in your garden, but this actually has really great protein and minerals in it. Common ragweed you're looking at 17.8% crude protein for that plant, which grows all over the place. And before you go out there and spray it, consider that. The deer are using it. The seeds are used by a lot of upland birds for food. Maybe leave that ragweed next time you're out spraying. And here's a coral berry growing in the summertime. As I mentioned before, it looks a lot like honeysuckle. So be careful when you're out there cutting and spraying. You know, get to know these plants. This is a native. This is really important on the landscape to have your native shrubs out there. The food, the berries are great for birds, provides great browse and structure for your deer, and you just have an overall healthier ecosystem. So I know that was a little rough with the layout. I had some issues with my computer, and I apologize for that. But I believe we have some really great information on here for all of you guys to think about and to consider when you're going out and looking at your property and deciding how you're going to implement these to help reach your goals and objectives on your property. So with that, is there any questions? So someone put a question in the chat and they said, does coral berry stay green late into the season like honeysuckle? No, coral berry doesn't stay green late into the season like honeysuckle. And that's one of the great things for managing for honeysuckle is because they'll keep those leaves on longer into the season. You can go in and you can do a foliar application and not have to worry about hitting so many natives because they've gone dormant. Aerial application of glyphosate in timber, if the oak leaves are falling off well enough, is a really great option in mid-November here in the Midwest for controlling large expansions of honeysuckle. And then in the spring, your honeysuckle is your first to bloom, but keep an eye out when you're doing any kind of treating of the stump with chemical and you start getting into late fall or late winter, early spring. You have to remember that these invasives that gives them a step up on these natives is that they're pushing nutrients up sooner. So keep an eye on that. You might want to hold off. We're starting to get to that time where the chemicals will be a little bit less effective on honeysuckle and some of your invasive species. I really like to go late summer all the way through fall and into winter. It's a great time. I mean, I personally would rather run a chainsaw when it's 30, 40 degrees outside than when it's 50, 60, even 80 degrees outside.
All right, so go ahead and you're more than welcome to keep on putting the questions that we've been getting into the chat and along with the question and answer feature. We do have some gentlemen with us tonight from the Deer Hunter Project, which is a great outreach program that's working on connecting deer hunters back to nature and conservation ethics. So Cody and Eric, we'll definitely let you guys take over with your presentation and kick it away for the second portion of this. But if anybody has any questions for either us or the Deer Hunter Project, make sure to keep them coming.
Okay, Cody, where is it at?
That's a good question.
I have a total black screen, my friend. I clicked on share your screen, went to desktop. Maybe.
Yeah. Did you
Keep it
open the
going.
PowerPoint?
I didn't get that far. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, try to open the PowerPoint and see if that'll bring it up.
Well, go to share screen. Desktop. I got black screen. How about a little help?
Open the PowerPoint and then go to share screen.
If that doesn't work for you, gentlemen, let me know. I did download the presentation and I can bring it up on my end.
Okay, because I just totally screwed up my screen. This is good. This is working out. Pretty good. I got nothing now. You're gonna have to do that there.
No.
Nothing. This is Cody's fault. Hey, there it is.
There we go.
There we go.
Cool.
Right. Now I know how Jared felt. Yeah. I think Cody needs to drop the little beard and go strictly Jared with his beard. That was impressive. That's an impressive thing.
It would take me a while to achieve that.
Yes, yes. Well, I want to welcome everybody. We good to go?
Yes, we are.
Okay,
Good.
thank you. All right, I want to welcome everybody. Welcome. I've been doing this for close to 30 years, and this is the first time I ever gave a PowerPoint to a screen. So this is like, again, if anything goes wrong, it's definitely Cody's fault with this. So, yeah, we are the Deer Hunter Project. Cody Altizer. Cody, wave. Say hi to everybody. There you go.
Hi there.
Yeah, I'm Eric Long, and Cody and I started the Deer Hunter Project several years ago, and it was basically what she said. It was, trying to reach the hunting community and kind of just bring awareness to issues that are out there in the conservation world, and just trying to connect people again to the whole conservation type movement. Okay, so I'm from Ohio. A little bit about me. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, a little bit about me. I'm from Ohio, and I've been managing wildlife for professionally close to 30 years. I travel all over the country, managing people's properties. I'm a deer consultant, and Cody, I just want to let everybody know, after he talks, everybody will question their career choices of what he does for a living. So, yes.
No, I'm a freelance photographer and videographer, and have been lucky to travel quite a bit all over the world I freelance doing photography and video, but what I specialize and enjoy doing most is outdoor hunting, wildlife management, conservation related filmmaking. And that's, like I said, I've been pretty fortunate that it's taken me to some pretty cool places across Europe and Asia and Africa, South America. And that's what I do for a living. That's what pays the bills. But what I am most passionate about is what Eric and I do on the side, which is the Deer Hunter Project. And, for me personally, what makes me tick is wildlife management. I mean, I do what I do because it affords me the time and resources and everything else that goes along with it to get out on the back 40 and stretch my legs and manage our property for wildlife.
Yeah. And it says here, advocators, hunters, managers, and naturalists. And that is what the Deer Hunter Project is all about. Cody and I have a podcast, and we try to get on there as much as we possibly can due to our schedules. We're not on there, once a week, once a month even. But the topics that we try to cover is conservation related. And, we are different than the average person in our message. We say things sometimes because we want you to think. We want you to be able, if you're listening to the podcast, drive down the road and just think about what we're talking about. You don't have to necessarily agree with it, but it's just, we're trying to get that light bulb turn on in your head there. And obviously, Cody and I are very passionate hunters, and our first love is managing for wildlife in general. And also, just a naturalist. We don't, sportsmen are naturalists if you allow yourself to be, and tear down a wall. But one thing I left out, and it was strictly by accident, is that what we are mostly is, storytellers. We do have some short films about conservation related things. And hopefully everybody goes checks out the YouTube channel and watch some of our films. I think we got 5 or 6 conservation films out there. So Storytellers is definitely one of them that we're pretty proud of. Wouldn't you say, Cody?
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. We probably should have included that into the old slide, but no, that's at the essence of what the Deer Hunter Project is, and what you and I try to do is to tell stories about wildlife management, conservation. And we've done some conservation message films that you can find on our YouTube channel from, like Katie said at the beginning, just kind of challenging our conservation ethic and how we view wildlife. We did one about kids and youth and getting them involved in the outdoors, but not your typical kids hunting video. We told that story from the kids' perspective. So we try to, like Eric said, a lot of the content that we do, the conservation films, and we started a new series of wildlife management videos on our YouTube channel too that we call our Way of Life series. A lot of those, at the root of them, it's telling stories and get people to just kind of stop and think about the bigger picture when it comes to wildlife, hunting, conservation, our hunting heritage, and all that goes along with it.
Yeah. Well, good deal. Well, let's move on to the next slide. All right. And like I said, the style that Cody and I have is not your normal style of presentation. We like to think outside the box, and we try to bring people together. And I know when we got asked by Jeremy to do this presentation, we kind of decided what the concept was, and I was trying to figure out, how do we name this? And after some good tractor therapy, doing some fire breaks, I kept on going back to, and Cody's mentioned it, I've mentioned it almost to death, is that Aldo Leopold was basically the greatest conservationist out there. And why was he? Because he was a sportsman, he was a hunter, but he was also a naturalist. And those combined made him so good, so great. And somewhere down the road, we separated. And I think it's about time that we bring our worlds together. And there's no better way to bring our worlds together than through our passion, our love for wildlife management. And so hence the name, bringing worlds together. So anything to add there, Code?
No, that was pretty spot on. And, the next slide, we called it redefining definitions. And, I think a lot of times as we limit ourselves by putting labels on ourselves. We call ourselves, if we're a deer hunter, we refer to ourselves as just deer hunters. And if we manage our properties specifically for whitetail deer, then we just call ourselves deer managers. But I think we sell ourselves short in that regard a lot of times, because we do so much more. Because we're our new YouTube channel series of videos that I was talking about, it's called Our Way of Life, and it's not specific to deer management, it's not specific to upland management, it's not species specific, it's about all wildlife management. Because if you think about it, I mean, most of you guys who are watching this, whether you're most into deer, quail, turkey, whatever, you're passionate about wildlife first, and then you kind of branch off into whatever is your specialty. For me, that was whitetail deer, but we called that channel what it's called, Our Way of Life, because wildlife, for guys like us and girls like us, wildlife is our way of life. Whether it's hunting them, managing for them, advocating for their conservation, wildlife, if we sit back and look at a bigger picture, wildlife influence and dictate a lot of the decisions that we make in life. Whether we're aware of it or not, which I think is kind of cool, and it comes with a pretty big responsibility. But I think just redefining what we refer to ourselves as. I think if you just call yourself a deer manager, you're more than a deer manager. You're a wildlife manager. You're a wildlife conservationist, and I think we need to do a better job of telling our story in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to piggyback up on that, and we're probably going to say this quite a bit, so excuse the repetitiveness. Did I say that rightly? Did I say that word right? Repetitive.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry. So I can only use like 3 big words a day, and I used them up earlier. So anyway, yeah, just tearing down walls, tearing down definitions of labels, and that's just like Cody said it really good there. I just wanted to just add that a little bit to there. So yeah. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and reinventing ourselves. Eric kind of touched on it there. It's, we limit ourselves and what we're capable of, I think, if we're honest with ourselves. And Eric mentioned removing that ceiling and tearing down those walls, and it's not so much reinventing ourselves, but continuing to evolve and taking that next step in our wildlife management journey. And I'll use myself as a prime example, because I first went hunting with my dad when I was 6 years old. Shot my first deer with dad when I was 6, and was hooked from that very moment. But for me, I was always more interested in the deer and the animal than I was in hunting them. Deer hunting was just a byproduct of being passionate and enthusiastic about whitetail deer. So even when I was a little kid, like once deer season went out, I was still curious, like, what's a deer doing in January? What's a deer doing in April and May? What's a deer doing in August and September? Like, I was asking those questions because I was curious about the animal. So I went from being into deer hunting, and that got me into deer management. I was all about the food plots and hinge cutting and everything that goes along with deer management. And then deer management opened my mind to wildlife management. And then that's really where I became aware that, every choice we make when we're managing our property for wildlife, it's a chance to improve that property for all wildlife. Like for me, deer was just the vehicle that I used to, navigate my wildlife management journey. Deer are for sure what I'm most passionate about. I am a deer hunter. I really don't hunt anything else, but I took that passion, and it was a long process for me anyway. I tend to move a little slower than most people. But I took that passion that I had for deer hunting, and then to deer management, and took that and kind of channeled it into, wanting to explore about all wildlife management. And now, I mean, Eric gets annoyed because I'll send him like a clip of a bird or a bird song. I want to know, I wish I knew my birds better. I'm curious about songbirds. Every decision that we make on our property anymore is done with grouse, as the primary concern, and then in deer secondary. So it's just, continuing to evolve. I think we're, to kind of go back to that previous slide, we're capable of so much more than just managing properties for deer. We have the ability to impact and influence all wildlife, from the biggest bucks to the tiniest bugs.
Yep. Yeah. And just from the previous slide to this slide, redefining definitions and reinventing ourselves. I just want to quickly add that, because of labels, when we see, want to get into pollinators, butterflies, bluebirds, we always feel as deer managers like that is not a manly thing to do, let's be honest. And, and that is just ridiculous to think like that as deer man. I see it with my clientele all the time when I start talking like, hey, let's put a short grass prairie in here. They just like, look at me cross-eyed. How's that benefit white-tailed deer? And it's like, man, there's a bigger world out there. You can take that knowledge that you have with deer management and you can make that and excel in that. It's just, again, like Cody said, reinventing ourselves, not being afraid, so next slide. But tie everything together. The slide says we are more than this, because we are. We have, as a deer management community, we have done so much. Think about the quality deer management philosophy, this philosophy that started back in the 80s and became the Quality Deer Management Association. Now it's the NDA. But think about those of you that have participated in that. What would you be? Where would you be? What would wildlife be if you didn't start that? Look what you accomplished on your piece of property or your lease hunting ground or whatever. Look what you have done. And we don't share that story. And, we just don't share it. Everyone thinks, okay, deer management, it's all about putting, meat in the freezer and stuff. And yes, that is part of it, but we are so much more than this as a deer management community. So
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's spot on. And you can make the argument that, Eric and I did a project a couple years ago that we'll circle back to at the end and explain in more detail. But, we did a project about ruffed grouse, and in that project, the project was for deer hunters to get them to invest in the future and management of ruffed grouse. And in that project, we made a promotional film for it, you know, and we mentioned that deer hunters are arguably North America's greatest conservationists. And I think that's absolutely true. Like if you look at where white-tailed deer were at the beginning, you know, 100 years ago, I mean, it's hard to believe now, but there were, I don't want to misquote the number, but there were a heck of a lot fewer deer on the landscape in the early 1900s than there are right now. And right now they're thriving. I mean, they do have obstacles. They need to overcome CWD and habitat loss and development. And for sure, I mean, there's always going to be hurdles to jump over, but deer are thriving and succeeding now because we got people to invest in the species, to care about their management, to care about their future. And that was, you know, those were deer hunters. Deer hunters did that. Deer managers did that. You guys did that for the white-tailed deer. So yeah, I mean, you took North America's most popular big game animal, and I don't think they were ever threatened with extinction, but numbers were low, and you brought them back to doing them, you know, that they're doing better now than they ever have been. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. So the bottom line is this. I mean, if we can produce this, and what I mean by that is that each of us that practice, you know, quality deer management, we have, you know, video, we have pictures of that buck that, you know, we had our hands in, in producing, you know, at least we feel like it. And, you know, all the hard work, all the failures, the sleepless nights, the yelling at the weatherman, it's too dry, it's too wet, and all the stuff that we go through as deer managers, the emotional roller coaster. But we find success, and how we measure that success is, you know, it's differently for each person. But again, we can produce, you know, this caliber maybe, but you know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder here. So it's like we can produce things like this. We have proven it time and time again. So next slide. And surely, if we can do all that, we can manage for this. Wouldn't we all say? So, but what's amazing here is that when you tear down certain labels, when you turn down certain, you know, walls, and realize there are no ceilings, the ceilings we are putting on ourselves, we can make a species like the bobwhite quail thrive once again. You know, the song can be heard. And the deer management community, with believe it in my heart, we can leave our mark on conservation by just switching gears a little bit. So
Definitely.
Yep. Next slide. Okay, so how do we do this? Let's tie it all together. Habitat management. Okay. So when we practice quality deer management, one of the things that we try to do, some key factors, is provide cover that equals food. Those that know me, especially my clientele, they get sick and tired of me saying that. I will say it all day long. We're trying to provide cover that equals food for white-tailed deer. Give them that security feeling where they can get up and also just munch down, have some groceries. But that's deer. Now, one could say that we could do the same thing for the bobwhite quail, for example. You know, just diversifying the food source and providing that cover to go along with it for brood rearing, nesting. I mean, everything that involves in a successful bobwhite quail population. So next. Provide a stress-free environment. Again, something that we always preach when it comes to deer management. Stress dictates milk production, fetus development, antler development. Basically, stress rules a white-tailed deer's life. So we try to provide a stress-free environment. Again, tying the two together. You are already doing this. You know, quail obviously need that stress-free environment where you're not training your dog, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're not going into nesting areas and stuff like that in key times. So it's basically the same exact thing. Next. And this one here is big. Provide diversity in your cover types. Always say you know, the more diverse your piece of property is, the more attractive it will be for white-tailed deer. And not to beat a dead horse, it's the same thing for bobwhite quail. Diversity, having different types of, you got to have that nesting cover, you got to have the brooding rearing areas, you got to have the winter cover areas for success. And I know I heard one time the old softball habitat check, where you throw a softball and it does certain things that tells you that you're doing good things and bad things. You know, you can base it on there. You should be able to hit certain types of cover. It's basically taking that big, large scale for white-tailed deer, and we're just basically just micromanaging it. So, Cody, anything?
Amen.
Richard,
Amen.
brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, next. And then also the habitat management toolbox. These are tools that are in a, you know, a consultant or deer manager's, toolbox that we go to, you know, manage white-tailed deer, food plots, native vegetation, native warm season grasses, pollinators, pines, shrubs, softmass trees, and water holes. Again, just, you can put the two together. Go ahead. Next slide there. Food plots. Probably the big thing on there is size and shape, location. Just again, tying all this together, where obviously these are the things that we look to when we manage white-tailed deer. We're thinking about seed, you know, what protein levels do we want a nutritional food plot? Do we want a harvest food plot? Location, do we want on a south facing slope, etc. Do we want it close to a bedding area, farther away from a bedding area? Size, shape, and obviously soil. But when you talk about the quail, we're just basically, again, scaling things down, just making things smaller. Locations, obviously, you know, when it talks about, you know, we're talking about food plots, we want it toward adjacent, you know, winter cover. And there's more to it than that. I'm just generalizing. And then obviously size and shape. We want to make sure that the, you know, the quail habitat is more in the blocks, not linear, because you have the predator situations, you know, predators that use their nose, you know, raccoons, possums, skunks, etc. You know, you got to make sure that these things are, you know, shaped correctly and obviously in the right location. Seed wise, that's probably the simplest thing when it comes to, you know, upland management. It's basically, it's basic seed, corn, your grains, you know, sorghum, etc. Where white-tailed deer is a little bit more complex. But yeah, Cody, got anything to add to that?
No, I mean, you're doing a heck of a job there, Eric. The main thing is, yeah, I mean, just to piggyback real quick, you know, a lot of the same principles that apply to deer management, you can apply to really all types of wildlife management, because it goes back to habitat, and habitat is food, water, cover, space, you know, and obviously species dependent, like certain species need certain types of habitats as far as food, water, cover, space. But, you know, just to drive home that same principle that, you know, as a deer manager, as somebody who's been practicing quality deer management, you can have that same positive impact on other species, just, you know, by applying the same principles that you have been doing for however long.
Yeah. Next slide. And then we have the native vegetation. That's some of the best properties I consult on in the country don't have one food plot on them. When we manage white-tailed deer, we strictly do native vegetation. And because the amount, like Jared was talking about, and he said it really good, that, you know, there's a lot of mineral, there's a lot of protein in old field environments, selective cuts. You can have, you know, mineral strumps, the whole 9 yards. When it comes to native vegetation, and Jared mentioned a little bit of it, let's break it down just a little bit more, how the two compare. When you manage like an old field environment, just native vegetation altogether, when you micromanage it, you know, you have your blackberry, your rubus species, it's usually in the 20% crude protein. All a deer needs is 16% crude protein to reach its optimum potential. So therefore we exceed that. But here's the thing, blackberry is, it's if you rank it high, medium, and low, you know, blackberry has a medium selectivity. But when it comes to quail, you know, some say that it has a high brood selectivity. So it's very useful. Pokeweed, it's above 30. Some say 32%. I've seen it in other things, but let's just say 32% crude protein. It has a high selectivity when it comes to white-tailed deer, and it has a high selectivity when it comes to like the brood aspect of it for bobwhite quail. Beggar's lice, Jared mentioned again, these species, roughly 28% protein, 30% protein, medium selectivity for white-tailed deer, very high selectivity for bobwhite quail. And the list goes on and the list goes on. But again, managing that native vegetation, it's basically the same thing. But what the big difference is, just real quick, and we'll move on, is that the only difference is what we're seeing from deer management to upland management is that we say, well, you need an old field environment. Yes, for white-tailed deer. But when you talk about upland, we're talking about diversity, going into that old field environment and really getting our hands dirty and making sure that there is bare ground for chicks, that there's insects, there's bugs, etc. We're just getting our hands a little bit more dirty on each subject that is highlighted here. So, Cody?
No, home run, man. I'll say.
Anyway, native warm season grasses, pollinators, Indian grass, big blue stem, shortgrass prairie, and the list goes on. I just listed several of them. And notice that I kind of avoided switchgrass. And Jared was, he did a great job talking about that. Back in the day, it's so funny. Back in the day, I say back in the day, it's like the late 90s, early 2000s. Shut up, Cody.
I was 12.
Cody was still in high school. Anyway, so we got to plant switchgrass. We've got to create this. I remember saying in seminars that it was like planting an 8-year-old clear cut. I remember those words coming out of my mouth because we were putting like 10 to 12 pounds per acre, wasting money, pouring the seed on there. So it's solid monoculture. And that is absolutely the most horrific thing that you can do, because there's no life. You create no life in it. And when you scale down, half pound, or whatever, just very less. I know Pheasants Forever has a really good breakdown of that, of, how many seeds per square foot or whatever that is. But having switchgrass, it's very aggressive. It is useful in the deer management. So doing that balancing act, make sure, like Jared was talking about earlier, low rate, a lot of forbs, a lot of diversity. Switchgrass, it's a bunch grass, so you'll have nesting, just not for quail, other species of birds as well. But the other, in my neck of the woods, Indian grass, big blue, we get the wet snows from Lake Erie and it just lodges. So sometimes we tend to go a little bit more switchgrass, but obviously location dependent on that. Anything good?
No, I mean, that was pretty well said. Like you and Jared both said, like with these warm season grasses, it's as well as they grow and as tall and as thick as they get. And quite frankly, as pretty as they are, like that shot of the Indian grass, like it's easy to overdo it. And a monoculture of anything is never a good thing. And that certainly applies to warm season grasses. Yeah.
And I know in the deer world, we're trying to constantly tell people you don't need to pour the switchgrass. You don't need to pour the Indian grass seed, drill it in at high rates. We're trying to add diversity. The more diverse a piece of property is, obviously for deer and quail or any upland species or even songbirds, it is a definite plus to have diversity in there. So next slide. Management toolbox. Okay, we have all these great things. We got to learn how to manage it. And we're just not going to dive deep into any of this. We're just giving a generalization, combining the two, how it is the same. Woodland management, control burning, herbicides, mowing, and disking. And those are some of the tools in our toolbox to manage the habitat toolbox. We need to come up with different names for this because that just kind of, it doesn't roll off the tongue anymore. So anyway, next slide. Good.
Yeah, woodland management. There's a wonderful shot of Eric there cutting down a nice big poplar tree. That's my favorite sound. Woodland management. I mean, at the fundamental, the foundation of woodland management is getting sunlight to hit the forest floor. Timber stand improvement, forest stand improvement. You see it there on the slide. Can produce up to 2,000 plus pounds of food per acre, which is really absurd. Like if you can visualize an acre and then visualize that acre when managed well, producing a ton of food for wildlife. It's pretty cool, and it's something that can be easily done. It can be done a handful of different ways, whether you have a professional logger come in and do a thinning or a selective cut. Hack and squirt's popular, girdle and spray, whether you go in yourself, with the chainsaw and fell the trees completely. Jared talked about mineral stumps. That's obviously very beneficial for deer, which is, again, I think those are the coolest thing, because you cut down a tree. Maples and poplars are real popular around here as far as the stump sprouts go. And you take a tree that was not useless to wildlife, but above a lot of wildlife's usage level, you cut it down, and then, Mississippi State, they did the research on it, and I don't want to quote the specifics of it, but you take a red maple and it creates a mineral stump, and it basically has the same nutrition content and palatability, I think, similar to your most popular forbs like pokeweed and ragweed. So that's you're a really easy task to create food and cover, by running a chainsaw. And obviously letting sunlight hit the forest floor, it certainly benefits wildlife, white-tailed deer. They're going to respond to that immediately and long term, but it also benefits your upland species as well. Where I live in Virginia and Appalachia, we actually have a population of ruffed grouse. We don't have quail, unfortunately, but the same principle applies to grouse and quail. And it's grouse, it's really cool. Eric shared this statistic with me a little bit ago that they eat over 300 and some different species. I think over 330 different browse species, which in a closed canopy forest, that number goes to significantly fewer. So letting sunlight hit the forest floor, yes, deer are going to benefit from it. They're going to respond positively to that type of disturbance and management, but it's also going to benefit ruffed grouse. Jared and Ethan talked about edge feathering and how quail respond to that, turkey nesting. So, closed canopy forest is really not good in a large scale for any wildlife, and removing those trees by whatever means you choose to do and letting sunlight hit the forest floor, certainly going to benefit deer, but also your upland species as well.
Yeah. And just real quick, it's just one thing. And it ranges, it depends. It's funny how there isn't one thing that you can necessarily quote, but the average is usually 60 to 70% of wildlife use that early successional type environment, the ecosystem there. So, for those of you that, I know we, as managers, we come across people that are against cutting trees. And the first thing I always say is like, do you love wildlife? And they say, absolutely. And then it's like, why don't you want to cut a tree down? Because it's more life uses that, especially the things that they're looking for. So next slide. Yeah, just to kind of go over this real quick. Control burning, same thing. When your deer management philosophy, doing dormant, growing season burns, and obviously the last two, achieve many goals. Safety always comes first when you're dealing with fire. But when you have a solid stand of switchgrass, doing a growing season burn, so that way we can get some forbs in there. Some kind of, just again, if you're into deer management and you realize, hey, I have a solid monoculture, and you are allowed to burn in your state or your area, doing a burn like that will definitely help you along. There's other methods on top of that, but yeah, it's again the same exact philosophy. We're just micromanaging it. That's it. Next slide. So this here, Cody is absolutely obsessed. If you was to ask, what is Cody's favorite thing? Is it long walks on the beach? Nope. Is it going on dates with women? Nope. It is spraying herbicide. So Cody thinks that this is actual a seminar, and this is actually an intervention. So we have like 21 people here. We're going to talk to you about your problem, Cody. Anyway, go ahead.
No, you're not wrong. I'm probably going to grow a third arm from exposure to herbicide, but no, you're not wrong, because I do enjoy it, and I'm glad Jared spent so much time talking about it in his presentation, and he went over kind of the specifics and the methodology about how you can do it. But I don't think it gets talked about enough. If you are a landowner, no matter what species you're managing your property for, or what you're most passionate about. If you've got non-native invasive species on your property, you're doing the habitat and the wildlife, they call it home, a disservice by not addressing them. And deer, and I hope people will understand the point I'm going to make with this. Deer, they are, I tell people sometimes I think we take deer for granted because they can adapt and thrive and live in so many different types of environments. And in monocultures of invasive species, like around here, we really struggle with Japanese barberry, autumn olive, stilt grass, tree of heaven. Deer are going to be, again, they're going to be okay. Deer will be fine in monocultures of non-native invasive species. By no means am I encouraging that, but deer, being what they are, being the ultimate survivor, they can get by okay. We obviously want to encourage native plant communities, and that will produce a stronger, healthier deer herd and individual deer. But species of concern like quail, grouse, turkeys, now they are more sensitive to non-native invasive species, and they need a more specific habitat type. So when you can, by whatever means, Jared went over a couple of different ways that you can go about removing non-native invasives. A lot of it depends on the time of year and the plant. I think it's just one of the most important things you can do when you're managing your property, whether it is for white-tailed deer, whether it's for quail, or whether you're just a wildlife enthusiast and you want to have wildlife on your property to enjoy and observe. You're going to see more wildlife, and they're going to be healthier and stronger, and you're going to have a better population of them if you remove non-native invasives.
Next slide. Yeah, just kind of wrapping this up here. Mowing and disking, where you can't burn, obviously, and there are states out there that say no. And so but mowing, don't just mow and disc, just never mow. Mowing promotes grasses, but we can produce, like in an old field environment, up to 3,000 pounds of food per acre. So add that along with managing your woodland type habitat, your early successional. We're putting some food on the ground for white-tailed deer, and also the spillover would be your upland community as well. But disking can simulate control burning, even grazing. A lot of we had a lot of Indian grass, big blue stem, and switchgrass all kind of put together. And we tried a little research project, if you will. We put in some milk cattle, Jersey cows, in a 7-acre field, and they were mowing it. Just mowing it down. We were making sure that they didn't get below a certain level where it would damage the grass. But the milk production actually stayed the same and then a couple points higher. So do you need to use fire? Do you need to use disc and stuff like that? But if you have if you got a bunch of cows, put them in there. That's just an outside the box type thinking. Use your resources. What I'm trying to get at. There are ways of getting around, especially if you have like a light disc where it's not going to penetrate enough to disturb the soil to get those beneficial broadleaves that we're trying to generate that has that all high protein, the ragweed, etc., goldenrod, etc. So got anything to add that?
No, you never told me about the that milk cow research.
I don't tell you everything.
Kind of, it's like the old bison on the plains. It's
yes.
Similar type of disturbance.
Yeah. All right, next slide.
Better tasting, I think.
It's probably like nobody listening. We're just like talking to ourselves right now.
No,
which is typical.
For sure. We see what we choose to see, and this slide, it's a really cool picture. And if you're a deer manager, deer hunter, you see this photo, and you right away you probably notice the crimson clover during the spring, and maybe the honeybee is secondary. And full transparency, like this is a food plot that I had planted. This is a photo of mine. It was a crimson clover cereal grain food plot planted the fall prior for white-tailed deer. That's what that was planted for. But then again, like you play a little bit closer attention, and you see the honeybee, right there. And what was really cool to me is this plot did really well during the hunting season, the fall prior, and obviously it came back really well the next spring. But what I took most satisfaction in was there for a couple afternoons when this crimson clover was in peak bloom. And when I took this photo, in that mid to late afternoon, like I would go walk through that plot. It was only about half an acre, and it was almost deafening, like the bees buzzing around, all that sound, all that life, that responded to that food plot. So obviously, we know the deer, you can see some cereal rye mixed into the crimson clover. Again, we know deer are going to respond well to a food plot like that. They responded well to it during the fall, the following spring during green up. Obviously they were in there and hit it hard too. But the point, we wanted to make here is, we can impact and influence so many more species of wildlife than just white-tailed deer. And like I mentioned prior, like using your passion for white-tailed deer and just kind of rechanneling it. Eric mentioned it in a lot of the habitat management slides. It's, where the same principles apply, but you're just micromanaging it for quail or for grouse or for pheasant or whatever species you're managing your property for. And, to kind of circle back to what we talked about at the beginning, that, as deer hunters, as deer managers, we're capable of so much more than just managing our property and improving habitat for whitetails. We can, and this picture is a prime example. It was a plot planted for whitetails, but I mean, there were honeybees, other native bees, bumblebees were flying around and crashing into the crimson clover. They were a hoot to watch, and turkeys, other songbirds. I mean, we created just so much life right there. And was it intended for white-tailed deer first and foremost? Full transparency, yes, but look at all the other wildlife that benefited from it. And as deer managers, we have that capability to really leave our mark on wildlife management and impact so many more species across the landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like, just to piggyback on what Cody was saying, we see what we want to see. You could also add, do not be afraid to see. Don't be afraid. What am I trying to say? I'm just butchering this. Don't be afraid to see what you see. And it's funny because, when, we plant, buckwheat, for example, especially like with the bees, the bee community. We're always thinking about the bee community. We got to have pollinators. We got to have crimson clover. We got to have all this stuff so they can make honey and all this stuff. But there comes a time where things stop blooming. And I'm just a sponge when it comes to learning new things. And you have to think back to yourself. When you started this deer management journey, you were just starving. You couldn't get enough of the education to where you are now. Again, do not be afraid to look into something else. But going back to the buckwheat, I had a friend talk to me about bees, and he was like, yeah, bees are kind of like everything's done blooming. They have nothing to to make honey, and sometimes they'll just eat all the honey of the fall storage. And here I was going to plant buckwheat for deer, and one would say, yeah, I'm managing for white-tailed deer and bees, other songbirds, etc., later in the fall, are the spillover. When in fact, I changed my mentality. It was all about a bee. I was planting this buckwheat strictly for bees, so that way they have something to pollinate, something to create honey with. It's just an example of choosing to see what you want to see, So if that made any sense.
No, it made sense to me.
Yeah,
and it just spurred another thought too. It's like, it goes, how we measure success as wildlife managers. You using that buckwheat plot as an example, and using this food plot as an example. I think a lot of times as deer managers, we use, killing a big buck as the metric by which we measure our management success. And if we're honest with ourselves, I mean, if you're killing the biggest buck in the woods more times than you're not, then you and I need to talk, and you need to tell me your secrets, because I fail a hell of a lot more than I succeed at that venture, and that's the thing. Like, if, at the end of a calendar year and you look back at the year prior and you're like, how do you judge that year's success? If it's only by killing big bucks or having big bucks on your property, then, you're going to fail for sure. And you're going to fail inevitably throughout wildlife management. I mean, that's just, that's an unavoidable fact of the journey. But there are certain things we can focus on, certain things we can control, you know, and how we measure success. And again, this food plot right here is an example. You know, with the honeybee, if I were to use this food plot and know I didn't kill a big buck out of that food plot, so if that were the metric by which I measured success, then yes, it was a failure. But look at, you know, I mentioned all the bees that I heard buzzing around that one afternoon and all the life that it created. So, you know, how we measure success as wildlife managers, you know, it's we leave such a positive footprint on a lot of the things that we touch, but I don't think we focus on them enough because we have those deer blinders on. Eric talks about it a lot, and I get tunnel vision myself during deer season. You know, but you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, and whatever you do on your property, like doing something is better than doing nothing. And whatever positive impact or difference you make on your property, whatever project you're doing, like you're leaving it better than you found it. And that's what wildlife management's all about.
Yeah. Next slide. Cody and I, this is a sentence, some wording here that we definitely wanted to put in here. We once were sitting where you are. You know, I'm a deer consultant. This is what I do for a living. Manage, you know, whitetail deer and wildlife, but most, you know, my passion, my love is obviously, you know, whitetail deer. And Cody, you know, I'll speak for him. It's who he is. It's his being. It's everything that represents him, and in so many ways, through photography and through hunting. And I think a lot of us can relate to that somehow, some way. But here's the thing: here we are. Deer Hunter Projects is starting out, and you know, we're obviously trying to change the world. you know, young and naive, trying to change the world. How come people are not seeing what we see? And we had Dr. Ben Jones on from the Rough Grouse Society on our podcast, and I forgot if it was Cody or myself. I forget which one said it. Neither here or there. But it was like, what is the future of rough grouse? And he basically said, Cody, zero.
Yeah, zero.
If we don't change our ways. And we, through the rest of the podcast, I could not stop thinking about that. And I think I wrote something down, sent it to Cody. Cody come up with Bucks to Birds, and we just dedicated, you know, working with the Rough Grouse Society, trying to take basically the same exact concept that we talked about today, take the deer hunting community and just wanting to shake them and go, you can make a difference. We've said several times throughout this presentation, you can leave your mark on conservation, and it's our responsibility to do so. We are in charge of passing this baton on to this next generation of deer managers. And if we only teach deer management, wildlife as a whole will not have the future. We have to come together as communities. We're separating ourselves, waterfowl managers, upland managers, deer managers. We're putting labels on ourselves. And it goes back to bringing our worlds together. It's tying everything in. And it's funny, just real quick, I'll let Cody chime in here, is that there's this place in Virginia, Cody and I, it's called the Grimm Farm. And it's a special place. We always joke around about if we ever win the lottery, what we're going to do with this property. And he was so excited to show me, and I was excited to see it just based on his, you know, his tone. And he's showing me all this, and I could see everything that needs to be done to manage for whitetail deer to just blow this property up management wise. And not to sound cheesy, but Cody, what did I say?
Oh yeah, you said I could hear a quail here.
Yeah. After all that,
yeah,
I could not wait. I wanted to hear a quail do its amazing sound, you know? So again, we were once sitting where you are. This is nothing crazy. This is nothing innovative. You know how to manage. And Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll never forget that day. Yeah, I could take you right to where Eric and I were sitting on the side by side, and you know, and he said that, and you know, a story that applies to me in this type of situation is, you know, again, once being where you were, you know, well, gosh, it's been 3 or 4 years ago now. My family and I, we were looking at buying a new piece of property. We had an old piece of property that changed hands, kind of unexpectedly, and we were looking for a new piece of property to buy and invest in. And it tied into the property that I grew up on, and up on top of the mountain. And we were in the process, we went back and forth with the agent a couple of times, but, just talking a little bit here and there, but we weren't full committal on it yet. We hadn't decided, like, for sure as a family, are we going to do this? So I went for a walk on it one day, late winter, and was like, I'm a spiritual person. I was like, I'm looking for a sign, like something that can point me in the right direction, that this property is worth buying, because it's a big investment. It was a big deal for our family. And I needed something that pushed me over the edge. And I was like, hopefully, like a shed, like, God, let me find a deer antler, or like this big buck, a buck bed, or this big ginormous rub, or something that tells me that this property is worth buying. And, I walked the property, didn't find any sheds, saw a lot of deer sign. And I knew that the property, held deer. But I got up towards the top of the mountain and I kicked up a rough grouse. And I remember as a kid, when my dad was hunting the same piece of property that I grew up on, he and my grandfather, his dad, like, they saw several grouse. They shot grouse. I mean, they saw grouse like you would see a turkey. I mean, it wasn't uncommon. They were on the landscape. There was a healthy population of them when my dad was, coming up. But ever since I was a little kid, like, I'd see maybe one every 2 years. Like, the population was in decline for sure. And I was walking that new piece of property and I kicked up a rough grouse. And, rough grouse are an indicator species. They're an indicator of, good solid habitat. That piece of property, it was a blank canvas. It needed some work, but that for me, that was the sign that I needed, that this was a property that was right for our future, was seeing that rough grouse, because I knew, it was good habitat and a property worth investing in. And, ever since then, like I kind of talked about throughout this presentation, deer, that is for sure my passion. That's what I'm most passionate about, hunting. And they're my focus on the property that we hunt and manage. But everything that we do, I know deer are going to respond to it well, because, deer, they're kind of easy when it comes to management, if we're honest with ourselves. So I know deer are going to respond to it, but every decision that we make on that property is done with grouse in mind, first and foremost. Like when we had a timber harvest done a couple of years ago, we just did some TSI this winter. I'm very cognizant and aware of every decision that we make. Like, I want to make sure that this is creating habitat suitable for grouse. And then, just to kind of circle back around, my passion has always been deer and deer management. And I rode and drove that passion into exploring all wildlife management. And right now, I'm into grouse and making my property more beneficial and attractive to them. So if you channel that passion and, put it to action, as deer managers, we can accomplish and impact so many more species out on the landscape.
Yeah. Just encourage everybody to, go to our YouTube channel and watch Bucks to Birds if you haven't seen it already. And we're trying to raise money for the Rough Grouse Society, trying to do what we could after hearing what Dr. Ben Jones was talking about, the president of the Rough Grouse Society. So next slide. And just to wrap this up, Cody and I have this quote: "There are no ceilings in wildlife management. We create those ceilings. We must change how we measure success for wildlife to prosper in the ever-changing world." And I don't know what else to say about that. It's basic. Yeah, I don't know. We're going to look back at this and we're like the only two laughing. Anyway, so no, it's just, we create ceilings, we create walls. And again, I say this a lot, not to be the dead horse, it's just redefining definitions. It's reinventing ourselves. It's bringing worlds together. We are the only ones that put ceilings on our knowledge. We are the only ones that put limitations on ourselves. There's the only thing missing. All the deer managers that are watching this presentation, the only thing missing, if it isn't on your property already, you have the food plots, you have the old field vegetation, you have the woodland management. You're doing everything. The only thing missing is that song, is that bobwhite.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing missing. And I'm telling you, once you decide to open your world, I promise you, you will, the satisfaction that you think you achieve when it comes to harvesting a quality whitetail, it will be tenfold when you can do both. So, Cody.
I don't want to take away from anything you just said. Whatever I would say would fail in comparison. That was really well said.
Yeah. So, yeah, next slide. So all donations go to Cody Altizer and Eric Law.
Yeah.
No check is too small. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it. You can look us up on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Yeah, we're at most active on all three. We do have a podcast. It can be on, you can find those on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, I think. We do have a podcast. So yeah.
No, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy, for reaching out to us. We hopefully we did a good job for you. And again, if not, it's Cody's fault. And
You're not wrong.
Yeah. No, again, thank you. It means a lot to us to be a part of any organization trying to do our part. And if there's anything else that we can do for you, you know, maybe we can partner up, Damie, doing some footage or podcast, whatever. Sky's the limit when it comes to this. So thank you.
We definitely thank everybody. We thank the Deer Hunter Project for joining us today and talking more about, you know, your initiatives and what you guys are working on with conservation and habitat. We definitely do want to thank everybody for joining us today. We did record this presentation. We will be uploading this onto YouTube tomorrow morning and sharing the link with the participants. We'll also be sharing this on our Facebook page as well. So if you have any questions or need to look back on anything we talked about, we will have that up there. But thank you again to Eric and Cody for joining us. And I encourage you to visit either their social media pages. I also encourage you to visit the Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever social media pages. And be on a lookout because we will be doing several more of these webinars in the future. We do have 2 planned in April with the Illinois Recreational Access Program, and then another one with the Illinois NWTF to talk about managing for quail and turkeys as well. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope everyone had a great night.